Kia ora tātou, kia ora whānau. Nau mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui. Bula vanaka, maloa lele, nimista, ni hau. Wassalamu alaikum, hi. When I was asked to think about a talk, I raced off to the TED Talk site for some insights on how to make this successful. And the first of 3 hints they gave you was start with a opening sentence that's quite provocative. That way you'll bring some people towards you. And after a bit of an arm wrestle with my spell checker to get the right version of porn up there, I ended up with the right political porn question. And by political porn, I think I mean that we're not even in the game as South Aucklanders. I think I mean that we are tools that other people who are playing a game that we seem excluded from use to achieve their outcomes. And I don't know about the rest of the South Aucklanders that are here or who are watching this feel about that, but I don't feel particularly good about that. And I wanted to unpack that a little bit and think more about it. The second thing that the good TED Talk folks mentioned was to describe to your listeners what your purpose is, because actually they're going to spend some time wondering where you're going over the next 15 minutes. And if you lose them in the first 3, it's all over. So tell them early on in the piece what it's all about. This is a call to action. If you go away from here today and you do nothing with what you hear, if all you do is learn and think and don't act, then I have failed, fundamentally failed. It's a call to action about designing our shared future, not having other people design it for us. And it's a call to action that's got a time frame. The time frame is between now and the 23rd of September, and it's pretty useful that Bill English confirmed that for me because it was going to leave a gap in this talk. So the 23rd of September, we're all going to get up and we're going to go and vote. Because if you don't act between now and then, if you don't act on that day, this has been a waste of time. The third thing that came through the great TED Talk, folks, was that you should open up with a really stimulating visual. You should use your visual to capture the imaginations of your audience. Put some energy into them. So here it is. Now look, I can feel it's already resonated with you. You have to understand the challenge. I'm an accountant. So through all of my profession, I've been told creative accounting is not a good thing. It will get you into trouble. So this has been the ultimate challenge for me in terms of preparing for this talk. And look, I know that there's some of you out there who are thinking, I know where this bloke's going. This is about the mountain we've got out in front of us. This is about our journey. This is about how we climb to the summit of our performance. And I know that it will also have stimulated some other thoughts, potentially, with you about, oh, this character's from MIT, Manukau Institute of Technology. They're all about thinking. They're all about the top 2%, the top 2% that's just under that hat. And there'll be others of you lurking around in here that are thinking, oh, well, this is just about getting over the hump, because actually we feel like we're just about there. 23rd of September is not that far away. And you're kind of all right, and I'm really glad that all of the effort that I put into that opening visual has got you to this point. But the reality is it's not sort of about any of them. It's about this. And this harks back more to my roots than to yours. And I can feel you flipping through the program already going, hell, what happened? I went to lunch at a TED Talk session and came back and it's Statistics 101 at MIT. Don't run up the aisles. Hang in there. This is important stuff in an election year. Because this is how politicians view populations. Those political strategists who sit in Wellington look at us through this lens in an election year. They break it down into 3 parts. They kind of look at the bit in the middle. And the bit in the middle in the New Zealand MMP kind of model has those primary colours around it. It's kind of blue on the right and it's kind of red on the left, and there's a scattering of green and other colours mixed in. It's important that it's around the middle, because 68% of the voters sit around the middle under this model. Well, if you win the hearts and minds, or just the vote, of more than half of those 68%, you're going to get yourself into government. In the old days, you'd get in there by yourself. Now, at least you get to take a partner with you. We need to know that, because actually as South Aucklanders, we want to be in that box. If we're not in that box, the politicians aren't all that interested in us. The bit around the middle is kind of the medium household income measure. So these are most New Zealanders, simply because of that definition. The other part of the diagram, out to the right-hand side, well, these are the people that I call the out-of-towners. They've made money in Aotearoa. Some of them are made in Tamaki Makaurau. But actually they've got in their flash cars, on their big boats, or in their aeroplanes, and they're out of town. Politicians are kind of interested in these guys, but there's not a lot of them, so they don't vote them in. They're kind of interested because they invite them on their big boats to America's Cup. They take them to the corporate boxes in the World Cup, but actually they don't actually get them into power. At the other end of the continuum, on the other end of the bell curve, people who don't have the money, who haven't reached that middle mark, who haven't got to the point of being part of the 68%, whose household income is well below that middle line. These are people for whom the system generally failed them. When I say system, I mean the education system, I mean the health system, I mean the justice system, or the economic system. Almost every system that government has a control over, it's failed these people. It's failed to help them get to that middle line. And I kind of wondered about that. I kind of wondered, why are the people who are so much at risk, so much at benefit from the efforts of government, not all that much of interest to government? Why do they sit out at this end of the curve? I kind of wondered whether, is that actually real? Is this just stuff that the statisticians, the smart people in Wellington kind of push past us? So I thought a bit harder about it, and I had a bit of a look around it, and I tested that fundamental theory. Actually, are voters important to politicians? Well, hell yeah. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to work that one through, so I didn't spend a lot more time on it. And I thought, well, actually, if the people at the left-hand end of this curve aren't all that important to politicians, why do we think that is? Do we think those are South Aucklanders? Well, I think they're South Aucklanders because I go out into the streets and have a look around, and I see people who are not yet at the medium household income level. Lots of us. And so we are in that bottom quadrant. And why might that be? And so I looked at some stats about last year's, or the last election. And this is what the stats tell me. Actually, we don't vote. If you're young, if you're brown, if you're Māori or Pacifica, if you're Asian, actually, we're not likely to vote. Well, it's not hard to work through that formula. If we're not going to help them get their job, they're not going to do much for us. They talk about us a lot, but they don't actually do a lot for us. If they had done a lot for us, then actually we wouldn't be in the challenging situations that many of us are in. So I wondered more about that. I wondered, well, if we've got a lot to gain as a community from participating in a democratic process that some of our forefathers laid down their lives to secure, that people in streets around the globe are laying down their lives to secure, if we don't participate in that once every 3 years, what's that about? And so I talked to some people about that, and I tried to understand a little bit more about why that might be the case. And I think it's because actually we don't believe that we can make a difference. When we talk to politicians generally, and Jenny would be an exception, when we talk to politicians, they don't look like they come from South Auckland. They don't sound like they'd come from South Auckland. They don't have cultural relevancy to South Auckland. They speak a completely different language in Wellington. They talk about bureaucracies. They talk about intervention logic models. They talk about stuff like that. We don't talk about that. We don't feel like we're engaged with them, so we don't participate. Well, I think as a consequence, we become a political pawn, and we have to change that. So what we need is not just somebody standing up here saying, go vote. We need a mechanism to understand and to feel like we can make a difference. And so I thought that the way to do that would be through a social impact bond model. Now, social impact bonds have been around for a long time. And when you look at them, there's 3 simple words. Social in a South Auckland context isn't some philosophical economic assumption. It's about the people. It's about us. That's what we mean by a social. I mean, when I was a young fella, when my dad was a younger fella, we used to go to socials. That's where people gathered. So social has always had a social kind of connotation. Impact. We know what impact is all about. Impact's one of those words that kind of sounds like it means. Impact. It's here. It has meaning. It has substance. It has significance. And bond. Well, bond to a South Aucklander isn't some tradable commodity that some venture capital's designed so he can make, or she can make some money on the New York Stock Exchange. A bond is a commitment between people. That's what we mean. And we see those bonds every time we go out onto our streets, every time we go down to the Otara market on a Saturday morning. We see those bonds across our community. So we intuitively understand social impact bonds. They have a relevance to us. We just want to talk about them in the way that makes sense to South Aucklanders. So when I overlay that South Auckland interpretation, it's all about people. Social impact bonds are all about the people. Now, this isn't a picture that you could ascribe to North Korea. There aren't any people in grey suits with one of 13 haircuts. We are all unique individuals in South Auckland, and that in and of itself presents quite a significant challenge. But it's a challenge we have to overcome and we have to face up to. When we think about social impact bonds in a South Auckland frame, we can't dismiss the government. We can't dismiss them because that lets them off the hook. We give them a whole passel of cash through the tax system to do great things for our people. So we can't let them out just because we've got a new idea. We have to bring them into the conversation. The way to bring them into the conversation is to let them know that there's something in it for them. Governments hate spending money on initiatives which have risk attached to them. If you're going to spend money on initiatives on an individual basis, there's going to be heaps of risk attached to it. So they're not all that interested in this model for that reason. They're really interested in it because they don't spend any money until there's an outcome. They agree the outcome up front and they don't spend a dime until that outcome's achieved. Governments love that. Ministers of Finance love it even more. And the new Prime Minister is an ex-Minister of Finance, so he should be all over this. It creates a problem though. If the government's not going to spend money, and there's a whole bunch of work to do, who is? Well, the model responds to that quite simply. It says philanthropists will. Now they use that big word, and I'm not entirely sure why they use that big word in the model, because actually in South Auckland, philanthropists aren't just the people who are in their planes and on their boats and in their flash cars and out of Aotearoa. They're the yous and me's. New Zealand is the second most generous society in the world. That doesn't mean we all sign big cheques every day and give our money away, but we give substantial amounts of time, effort, intellect, goods and service, and some money. All of that capability sits here in South Auckland. We don't need people to fly in and be philanthropists. We actually have them here. So these people solve the interim money problem. If you're going to solve and support some people through some socially challenging issues, you're going to need some people to do that mahi. And those people under the model are called service providers. I don't know about you, but if I'm going through a challenging circumstance, I don't want somebody flying in who has an appointment on Wednesday at 11 o'clock for half an hour to talk to me. I want to be able to walk up the street. I want to be able to see them in the market. I want to be able to engage with them in my environment. I want them to be of South Auckland. This is not a mining industry problem out of Perth where you fly in and fly out. These are challenges that are faced head-on in South Auckland, and we want our service providers to be from here. And we have heaps of them. Now, this model's got a whole bunch at play. You've got deals getting cut with government. You've got deals getting cut with philanthropists. You're trying to understand what's going on at an individual level. You're coordinating services amongst service providers. And somebody's got to do that, or some organisation's got to do that. And in the model, they're called intermediaries. And again, I'm not entirely sure why they use that term, but I might as well reference it because that's what they use. For me, they're deal makers. And we don't need people to come into South Auckland to be deal makers. Goodness me, we've got more deal makers in our streets than we know what to do with. I don't mean that disrespectfully, actually, although it may have come across that way. Māori, Pacific Island, Asian, Pālangi, Pākehā, we all have deal-making backgrounds. We have the deal makers here. So we have every element for the social impact bond conversation here in Tamaki Makaurau, outside of the government. We already know how to influence the government. We vote them into power. We get ourselves inside that conversation. We take the conversation to them. That's my call to action. Take the conversation to them. Make South Auckland relevant to the politicians, because we're going to vote. Don't rest on the past. Don't accept that past performance as the future. Change that as we go forward. Now, I've been interested in social impact bonds since they came about in about 2010. In 2011, I did a bit of research around it, In 2012, I got quite excited about it because a couple of countries got a couple away. And then in 2013, I was almost dancing in the streets because the government said, actually, we've had a look around the world and we know how to engage our people and we know how to respond to some of the challenges, these persistent, sticky social issues, as they called them. We're going to implement a social impact bond pilot. And I just thought, yahoo, I'm on the front of the wave. I've been paddling for a couple of years and I finally caught the wave. Something revolutionary is going to happen in New Zealand and I'm kind of there in the moment. And then I've watched since 2013 to 2017 as basically nothing has happened. And I don't understand why. Until recently when I thought, actually it's because we're not taking it to them. We're not having this conversation with government. We need to have this conversation with ourselves. We need to put it on the political radar. We need to force the government to do something about it. Now, somewhat unusually, 10 days ago, the government, and I doubt there's any connection between me coming and talking about this and this media announcement, but the government came back to the people of New Zealand and it said, we've got a great idea. In the media release, they said, we're going to pilot a social impact bond. Well, goodness me, they could have just gone back to the transcript from 2013 and just published it again, because that's basically what it said. Worse still for me, though, is they said, we're going to trial a social impact bond in South Auckland. Well, I've been talking to people in South Auckland about social impact bonds for a whole long time. And the first I knew about a social impact bond happening in South Auckland was when the government put it in the newspaper. That hardly sounds like they're listening to our voice. It hardly sounds like we got involved. It sounds like, yet again, we're the political pawn. But I wasn't too disheartened by that. I kind of hung in there and read the media release. And then my jaw dropped a little bit when they said, and by the way, we're going to pilot it with the people in your community who are struggling with mental illness. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not all that enthusiastic about a pilot with people who are in the most vulnerable situation in our community. So that worried me at another layer. And then I got towards the end of the media release and they said, fear not, we've got an Australian multinational to come in and be your service provider. Well, for me, that just about canned the deal. I mean, we don't need Australian service providers to come into South Auckland to support our people. We can do that from here. The only multinational Australian service providers I see in our streets are the banks. And the last time I looked, they took about $6 billion out of our community back to Australia. I don't think we need another one in here trying to support our people. In amongst it, they talked about the second pilot, and the second pilot is about recidivism, about repeat youth offending. Now look, we know, all of us in South Auckland know that that's a challenge we have to front up. But it's not about the youth offending, it's about the root cause. And the root cause is about education. It's about the system that failed those young people and failed to give them the skills and the competencies and the confidence to participate and keep themselves out of trouble, keep them moving in the right direction. It's not about locking them up. It's about starting where it starts and giving them the education and the skills. So I want you to think about that, but I want you to act on it. I want every opportunity that you have to talk to the MPs, to talk to the people who are in the political machinery, to talk to them about social impact bonds, and to tell them that we can design our own solutions for the individuals and we can resource that. All we want is a commitment from them is that when we do their job, they will pay us for it and pay us a premium. Thanks very much.